relevant, so to speak, as the environment which interacts with our biology.
However, as one final example worth considering, which from my perspective summarizes the overwhelming power and relevance of our environmental culture we are exposed to, let's consider the implications of feral children. A feral child is a human child which has lived isolated from human contact from a very young age, isolated from society, or human society.
Historical examples of this range from children that have been locked in rooms by their parents for years, to children who have been abandoned in the wild and raised, so to speak, by animals. This is Jeannie. She was discovered in 1970, having been locked in a single room, virtually alone, for 10 years. When they found her at 13 years old, she could barely understand language, and she knew only a few words. She was 54 inches tall. Her eyes could not focus beyond 12 feet, and she walked in an awkward, hunched manner, and she could not chew solid food. Once rescued, psychologists and scientists immediately began working to rehabilitate Jeannie, creating a nurturing environment, and she quickly began to overcome a great amount of the problems that she had had, but due to the severe emotional scars that she went through, something very specific stuck out, which has a specific relevance to the point I'm trying to make, and that was her inability to learn language. While humans obviously have a genetic predisposition for language, it is cases like this that show how the environment does not, if the environment does not engage those propensities at a certain point in time, then those language capabilities will not form. It requires the environment to stimulate the effect. And that's a very important thing, and I'm going to keep reiterating that. This young girl was rescued in May of this year in Russia. She was locked in a room with dogs and cats for several years, causing her to behave like an animal. She could not speak. She lapped up her food and drink with her tongue, and she walked on all fours. She was 5 years old when they found her, but her physical size was only of a 2-year-old. This is fascinating, apart from being horrific. It's the fact that feral children, they can pick up and imitate things in their environment that to us would seem absolutely unhuman. This is a girl named Oksana Malaya. She was also extremely neglected and ended up spending the majority of her childhood between the ages of 3 and 8, 5 years, living with dogs in the back of the family home. She actually slept in the kennel with the dogs for 5 years, and when rescued, she had adopted incredible canine mannerisms, including barking, a higher-than-average sense of smell and hearing. She ate raw meat. She walked on all fours and knew virtually no language. It is sociological examples like this that should really make one step back and question the lowest common denominator of what is supposed to be human nature. Please understand that there's no denial that we human beings are wired in a particular way. However, the fact is we obviously, especially at a young age, have an incredible ability to adapt to our environment. We are exceptionally malleable, and as studies have shown, will adapt based on what is supported and reinforced by the social condition we inhabit. If the known propensities of human beings, such as walking upright, learning language, and the like, are not triggered and supported by the environment, then they might not manifest. Therefore, again, the human being is very much a cultivated organism. The quality of a person's health and behaviors really comes down to the quality of the environment, culture, and hence social influences they are exposed to. This is critical that society fully understand this and adjust accordingly. It should be no wonder the world we live in when we examine the system, the environment that creates us. And this is the point. We, as so-called individuals, are running composites of our life experiences. We are walking expressions and cultivations of the environments we have passed through up until this very moment. And when it comes to survival, only those behavioral attributes that have served a function in your environment are reinforced and made dominant. Once you understand this, the corrupt world around you suddenly makes perfect sense. Human beings are not inherently greedy or inherently competitive or inherently corrupt. It is the social system, it's the environment that creates us. Just as a young girl would choose to walk on all fours and bark because that's what the environment makes similar to her, we become corrupt and we become self-interested because that's what our culture has created and put upon us. So the social imperative that emerges out of all of this in the long run is that there is a great deal of care which needs to be taken in regard to our social environment. We must alter the system in such a way so it does not create, support, or reinforce those behaviors which are socially harmful. And that's what social design is about. It's interesting to point out, and this takes me to a subsection of this, it's interesting to point out that competition and hierarchy, which seem dominant today, have not been the dominant ethos of human society for the majority of our time on this planet. Before the agricultural or Neolithic revolution, which occurred about 10,000 years ago, hunter-gatherer societies actually had a non-hierarchical, egalitarian social structure. The social values were based essentially on equality, altruism, sharing, and literally forbid upstartism, dominance, aggression, and egoism. We know this because of the anthropological research that has been done on remaining hunter-gatherer societies over the course of the past century. I find this fascinating, that for the bulk of our existences, as the human species, 99% of our societies have been virtually non-hierarchical, non-materialistic, and have had the wisdom to appreciate a minimalist affluence, as opposed to the dominance-driven, excessive, and unsatisfied culture we see today. Regardless, this historical reality puts into question the notion that social hierarchy is a natural human tendency. What it is a social condition that has been created. In the view of Robert Sapolsky, hunter-gatherers have thousands of wild sources of food to subsist on. Agriculture changed all of that, generating an overwhelming reliance on a few dozen food sources. Agriculture allowed for the stockpiling of surplus resources and thus, inevitably, the unequal stockpiling of them. Stratification of society and the invention of classes. Thus, it has also allowed for the invention of poverty. The core basis of social hierarchy is real or perceived scarcity. Social hierarchy is a formalized system of inequality which serves as a substitute for perpetual conflict over scarce resources. In view of our Western society, which, as we have denoted, works to literally preserve scarcity, it's easy to see how our social classes are perpetuated unnecessarily. But the problem doesn't stop there. Another consequence, which is very new, has to do with the chain of causality, one that affects every one of us in a way which is almost hidden. And that has to do with the effect it has on our health. Studies have shown that people of higher socioeconomic status live longer, enjoy better health, and suffer less from disability, while those of lower socioeconomic classes die younger, suffer the largest burden of disease and disability. Now, this most often comes in the form of a gradient, meaning that from the highest upper classes straight down the lowest bottom classes, each successive step, up or down, the socioeconomic ladder constitutes a respective quality change in a person's health on average. On the surface, this would seem absolutely logical, right? Just makes sense. In the sense, lower classes often have poor diets due to a lack of purchasing power. They are more prone to live in polluted areas. They are more likely to get subpar health care. And due to lack of education, they might not take care of themselves in the best way. Now, while these attributes are obviously relevant to health, new studies have shown that there is something else going on that is contributing to the increasingly poor health and disease propensities of people, the lower they go in the social hierarchy. One of the most documented studies that has been done on this issue has been called the Whitehall Study. It's done here in London, at the University College of London, using the British civil service system as a subject group. They found that the gradient of health quality in industrialized societies is not simply a matter of poor health for the disadvantaged and good health for everyone else. Something else was happening. Remember, this is the UK where healthcare is socialized, and theoretically you have equal healthcare. They also found that there was a social distribution of disease, meaning that as you went from the top of the socioeconomic status to the bottom, the types of diseases people would get would change on average, but they'd be linked. For example, the lowest rungs of the hierarchy had a fourfold increase of heart disease-based mortality. compared to the highest rungs. I think, if I remember correctly, the highest rungs were things like melanoma, people sitting on their yachts, which I thought that was quite amusing. Regardless, this is the pattern, and to a certain degree, it's irrespective of healthcare. Keep this in mind. Disease is being generated irrespective of socialized healthcare. Even in a country with universal healthcare, the worse a person's financial status, the lower they are in the social hierarchy, the worse their health appears to be getting. Why is this? As it turns out, psychological stress generated from social inequality. Not the byproducts of inequalities such as poor nutrition, healthcare resources, or education for a person's health, but inequality itself, psychological subordination. Concurrent research done by Richard Wilkinson at the University of Nottingham found that more income inequality there is in a society, the worse the gradient of health and mortality rates. This is irrespective of absolute income, and again, it has nothing to do with healthcare and nutrition. Evidently, the more income inequality that exists in a society, or in other words, the more stratified a society is, the more money that's divided between the culture, the more health problems that occur in the upper and lower classes together. It isn't about money in and of itself. It's about the psychological ramification, the psychological stress or psychosocial stress generated by the social hierarchy itself. Not to mention, as an aside, it is also well documented that the more income inequality that exists, the more crime, assault, robbery, murder are probable. Not the more poverty and deprivation that causes this, the more inequality. Does everyone understand that? That's a very interesting point. This is easy to exemplify, for the United States, which has the largest income gap on the planet, also has the largest crime rate in the world, the largest prison population in the world, and amusingly, we're also the most aggressive and armed nation in the world. Go figure. The bottom line is that when it comes to the comparison of hierarchy to egalitarianism, in other words, people being equal or people being stratified, egalitarianism or equality, when it comes to psychologically stress-driven health, trumps stratification for the whole of society, from crime to disease rates. So, in conclusion to this section, I hope I've made this relatively clear, because it's a really important point when you think about it. Not only are social classes modern inventions of human society, social classes are scientifically proven to be detrimental to the health of everybody by the very construct of its creation. I think, in conclusion of this formal presentation, that is one of the most incredibly compelling motivations to seek alternatives. The very fabric of the larger order of society is intrinsically and provably unhealthy. And coupled with everything else that we've talked about, I think that adds a tremendous weight to moving forward into something new.